Hey, Shadows listeners, if you're looking to make some extra income that also impacts people, then you need to look at becoming a certified leadership coach with Giant. If you don't already know, Giant has been in the leadership space for over 13 years. I got certified through Giant in 2018, and I've been teaching ever since. Just to give you some context, they used to own and operate the John Maxwell brands. They ran the LeaderCast conferences where Jim Collins, Henry Cloud, Malcolm Gladwell, and Simon Sinek, just to name a few, were regular speakers. They have over 500 coaches worldwide, working in over 127 countries, and are being hired by companies like Google, Chick-fil-A, Pfizer, Delta, and more. And yes, you can do this too. I know this might sound intimidating, but Giant will literally give you everything you need to start your own coaching business from scratch. You get hands-on training from top-level coaches to learn the exact methodology and tools that six-figure coaches are using. You get an all-in-one online platform to run your entire coaching business, even if you want to work 100% remotely. And you'll get to join a thriving community of coaches from all around the world. To get started, Giant is hosting a coaching business workshop to help you learn the ins and outs of how to build a successful coaching business. This is both for experienced coaches, consultants, and those who are looking to start coaching and consulting with little to no experience. If you want to hear the really good news, this whole workshop, it's free, 100% free. And you can reserve your spot by going to giant.tv/shadows. Why not give it a shot? What's better than making a positive change in people's lives and making some extra money in the process? Giant launches a new hiring cohort every month. Now, they only have 20 coaching slots available each month, so it's first come, first serve. So go ahead and make sure you reserve your spot. If you're ready to make an impact and get paid doing it, go to giant.tv/shadows, giant.tv/shadows. Welcome everyone to a special Veterans Day episode of Rise from the Shadows featuring Joe Bogdan discussing the topic of character. I want to say, first of all, happy Veterans Day to all of our veterans out there that are listening to this podcast. We appreciate you. A couple of quick announcements before we get started with this episode. First, we are moving. We have a new date. That's right. We are no longer going to be airing the Shadows podcast on Mondays and Rise from the Shadows on Fridays. Starting December 3rd, we will now be dropping our episodes every Thursday. So definitely make sure you adjust your calendar to that. They'll still be available on all podcast platforms and our YouTube channel as well. Also, you've probably seen, if you're following us on Instagram or Facebook, the Lima Charlie Network. More to come. We will have full details on episode 58 of the Shadows podcast, The Chronicles of Kalithrite, in 2 weeks. Also, make sure you're following us on Instagram, _Shadows Podcast, and on Facebook at The Shadows Podcast. And make sure that you head over to our YouTube channel. Hit subscribe. We just started our YouTube channel not too long ago. And everything Shadows Podcast, Rise in the Shadows, and Off the Air is available over at theshadowspodcast.com. Now, this episode of Rise in the Shadows features Joe Bogdan. He was our very first guest on The Shadows Podcast. He was also alongside W. Scott Green, episode 50 of The Shadows Podcast. But now he joins us on Rise from the Shadows. And he talks about the topic of character. He talks about identifying and living your personal core values. He discusses consistency, what that is, what that means to him. Also, he talks about putting the wants and needs of your team ahead of the personal wants and needs of yourself. Also putting maximum effort into those things you don't necessarily want to do. And he ties all that together into character and his personal core values. We dive a little bit deeper into that and some self-reflection after he concludes his brief. But check out all the incredible things the Llama team is doing over at llama-leadership.com. I'm a huge fan of everything that the Llama leadership team does. The Llama Lounge Podcast, I think, is absolutely incredible. It's one of the reasons that the Shadows Podcast is what it is today. Also, check out all past episodes of Rise from the Shadows, The Shadows Podcast. One more time, theshadowspodcast.com, and over on our link tree, which is in the episode description. Now, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, it's time to rise from the shadows.
I remember years back when I was a young and impressionable non-commissioned officer. I had the privilege of working with a particular senior leader that displayed amazing attention to detail and organizational skills. Whenever I went into his office, it was immaculate and everything was organized and exceptionally orderly. When he taught a class, he would show up early and ensure that every detail of the classroom was perfect. He checked the IT and the audio-visual systems to ensure their operation, and he made sure each student's area was set up identically and neat. The entire classroom was set to perfection, and I thought to myself, this is what we all should strive to be like. That is, until I saw how he reacted when another coworker asked him to assist her and set up her class as she was double booked. It was a reasonable ask, and he told her he would, and I helped. Knowing his standards, I tried to meet them. I set up each student's area to perfection. Nothing was out of place. But to my surprise, when I looked up, he was throwing books into place and it was done so quickly. The classroom was not even close to the standard he would set for himself. That's when I realized he was only worried about the way he looked. And when it wasn't necessarily a reflection of him, he did not put in the same effort. As I reflected on what I learned about him that day, more and more examples began to manifest in his behaviors. Everything he did seemed to be just a show with little substance. I remember once when he gave me the advice to always bring a notebook to a senior leader engagement and pretend to take notes since they, quote unquote, like that. I realized it was just a facade, and upon more reflection, it made me realize what character and the lack thereof look like. Internalizing this, I wanted to make sure I never reflected this lack of character. Character is something that is discussed, but it isn't something explored very often. In my opinion, it plays a critical role in an organization and our overall society's future. People of low character do not make good leaders, and since we are interdependent, they end up negatively affecting others and a lot of time don't even realize what they are doing. But as important as it is, why don't we teach formal blocks of character in schools and in continuing education? Why don't we assess and truly evaluate character in an employee's interview, their midterm feedback sessions, or even during their annual appraisals? It's because it is hard to teach and evaluate such a complex concept such as character. It's easy to identify and hold people accountable to lapses of character that are represented by criminal acts, dishonesty, and lack of follow-through on commitments. But some intangibles are hard to assess. And to add to that complexity, people often do not appreciate someone addressing their character and will likely express they feel their character is being attacked. What I have discovered is that to develop a team of character, we must first lead with character, and we must continuously be willing to look in the mirror and hone our own character. So how do we hone it? First, I would say identify your core values and live by them. Most people do not take the time to do the deep work and identify their personal core values. Sometimes they are not apparent. However, when we do that work and identify them, we can live to them and show uniformity in our words and behaviors. To help identify your core values, I'd start with what really bothers you. One thing that I realize that really bothers me is when I see inconsistency, whether it's with what people say and do or inconsistencies in rules. I determined a long time ago that consistency is one of my core values, and knowing that helps me understand myself and how I project myself into the world. Another way to hone one's character is to be a good teammate. Being a good teammate is about putting the wants and needs of the team ahead of your own. Sometimes we need to take a bunt for the team when our home run record is on the line. Being willing to make the sacrifice shows character, and making it a habit cultivates it. Also, a motto I live by is that putting maximum effort into the things we want to do is called normal. Putting that same amount of effort into things that we do not, that's called character. Anyone can do their best at the things they enjoy or are good at, but resisting the urge to mail it in and simply get over the things we don't want to do and deliberately exerting world-class effort into those less than desirable tasks is a practice in character. One more way to hone your character is to make it more about others. This is easily practiced when in conversations. We often want to tell people about ourselves or inject our thoughts in the middle of a conversation. You should never waste an opportunity to make it more about others, or as the great Will Rogers once said, never miss a good chance to shut up. Developing an ethical framework is another key component of honing one's character. What questions will you ask yourself and your team when faced with an ethical dilemma where the quote unquote right answer is not apparent? As leaders, the higher you rise, the less likely you will face problems with clear-cut right and wrong answers. Developing a framework in which you will navigate through such problems is a must. Start with learning about the different ethical perspectives and develop your own framework. Finally, it's paramount for a leader to recognize and reward acts of strong character. As the warrior poet and seminal leader, General James Mad Dog Mattis once said, institutions will get what they reward. I seek out acts of strong character in my organization, those that aren't just paper tigers and look good on paper, but those that put maximum effort into every task, no matter how big or small. The ones who are willing to take a bump for the team, those that make it about others. And I find creative ways to recognize their efforts. And I absolutely will not advance someone who does the opposite, no matter how good they look on paper or when they are around people of influence. Character is indeed a difficult quality to teach, evaluate, and hone. But where there is a will, there is absolutely a way. And it won't be the me monsters that will take us collectively to the next level as a society. It will be the men and women of character.
All right, welcome back to Rise from the Shadows. I'm your host, Joe Bogdan, and I'm here with Joe Bogdan, who just delivered a phenomenal message on character for us. How's everything going over in Korea with you?
It's going awesome, Bodie. Thank you for giving me the opportunity, and I always love catching up with you. Korea is getting cold, and this is my third tour here, and I'm not looking forward to the winter because it gets frigid. I remember last time I was here, I had some folks coming in from Alaska thinking, why is it so cold here? And I was like, really? You think so too? Yeah. So it's interesting. I had some of my guys working on some high voltage lines up in the air, and it's not even that cold yet. And it was just raining, and I was sitting there looking at them working on it, and I'm like, yeah, those days are over for me. I mean, I just can't do it anymore, man. I'm getting old, man. I just can't be out in this freezing cold anime. So yeah, it was a nice little epiphany I had.
Well, if it makes you feel better, it's November, and I went running outside today in shorts and a short sleeve T-shirt. It felt really nice.
Yeah, that does make me feel better, man. I'm glad to see you're doing, because you're part of the no cardio crew typically. So I'm really happy that you're out there.
No cardio. Oh, okay. We're going to edit that out of this episode. I've actually been running a lot more lately. So
it's good. Good. Body by Bodie.
Yeah. It's not just muscles. It's not just muscles. It's cardio too. All right. Well, this interview is getting off to a really good start. So one of the things I wanted to ask you, first of all, awesome message there. Talking about character. I think it's something that, it can relate to every single listener out there. But you talked too about your personal core values. Where was that moment in your life where you kind of decided what your personal core values were?
So it really was inspired by a mentor and friend of mine, General John Gronsky. We were talking, and it's one of those things, you hear about it, having those personal core values, and us, being airmen, we think about our organizational, institutional core values, but I never really sat there and thought about, well, what are my core values? And I think a lot of us are probably in that boat where we just don't think about it, that including your leadership philosophy, don't take the time to write it down and think about it. And he brought it up, how important it is. And he shared with me his, and I was like, well, what are mine? So I sat there and I thought about it, and it still took a while. It was difficult. And then I realized it was what really helped me figure out what my core values were. And it was kind of like incidental. It wasn't like I was thinking about at that moment, but it was like, what really irks me? What are my values that when somebody crosses them, or I at least perceive it that way, that it bothers me? And I realized, all right, consistency is one of my core values. I want to be consistent. And I get really irritated when people are not consistent with what they say versus what they do. Or like during all of this COVID madness, hey, make sure you're 6 feet apart when you're getting in line to get onto the airplane, just to be sitting right next to somebody when you're on the airplane. And I'm sure there's all kinds of science about the filters in the aircraft, but initially I'm looking at it, I'm like, that drives me insane, right? Right. Just that concept of that. So I realized, man, consistency is definitely one of my core values. And that's what I think at that moment, and that wasn't even that long ago, I really thought about it, and I came down with what my core values were. And it's really another thing. Consistency is one. Another one is just character overall, in my perception of what I think people, of good character are, good teammates and all that, and not being self-serving. And then the third of my core values is competence, because I know I get really irritated when people don't take the time to be competent at what they're doing. Right. Like, why even waste the time? So those are things that I realize that bothers me. And it's not, I try not to project those onto other people, but I feel that those are important to me, and I internalize them and I utilize them to make sure that I'm living to my own core values.
What's a red flag for you based on someone's character?
Yeah. So characters is a complex, right? And it really is. That's what I kind of talked about in my talk. But something, the one thing that jumps out at me is if someone's self-serving, if they are not loyal to the absent, like they're talking trash about people that aren't around, that shows me low character. I think that because, if people are not loyal to the absent, when you're not there, there's a good chance they're going to be talking trash about you too. You know what I mean? That's just what they do, right? It's probably in their nature at that point. So it's part of their character. Some other points, what I would say, and I would say, honestly, we've all probably fell into that trap, you know what I mean, of doing that. So I try to catch myself and refrain from those low character moments. But other things are people who take care of themselves before they take care of the people around them. Like, for instance, if you're an Air Force supervisor and you're not taking care of your subordinates, but you turn in your 1206 for your award, you know what I mean? Like,
that's exactly what I was thinking at 1206.
Yeah. Well, people, those are low character moments for me. People that aren't willing to sacrifice a little bit of themselves for the team. They want to put themselves out there. So I kind of use that example as, someone that's willing to take the bunt for the team when their home run record's on the line. That's a person of character, a person that fully swings and takes that home run, and they're not getting the runners on base and everything else. So the team really needs that. And so that's a low character moment to me, and that you kind of see that out there.
Lay down that bunt every now and then.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Sacrifice hit.
Mm-hmm.
Now you mentioned something about like the, checking yourself, that self-awareness. For listeners out there, that can be tough at times. And I mentioned this not too long ago, but, Noble Givens was talking to some of my students last week, and he said, sometimes you got to look under your own hood. And how does someone practice self-awareness?
Man, so self-aware, there's a lot of tools out there. One thing I would say is you really just got to take the time, right? Take the time to look and ask yourself certain questions like, who am I? What drives me? What am I passionate about? What irks me? You know what I mean? And like, those sound like simple questions, but how many of us actually take the time to ask ourselves that? Because if you don't ask yourself that and you don't understand and you're not fully aware of yourself, what triggers you, what drives you, where you get your energy from, when you're fully exhausted, what are your values? Those things, if you don't take the time to do that, you're kind of just participating in life, because when things happen, you're always reacting. Right. And if you don't know who you are and you're, for instance, constantly living in your weaknesses or things that you're not normally doing, if you do that all the time, it's going to drain your energy. And when you're draining your energy because you're not who you really are at those moments, not to say that there's not value in those moments, because sometimes we got to step outside our comfort zone and do different things. But if you're always in that moment, we talk about a lot on the Llama leadership team, HALT, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. If you're any of those four, you're probably going to not make the most mature decisions. You're going to go off on people. You're not going to give people the patience that they deserve, and all that stuff. Right. So there's a lot of negative consequences of making decisions or behaving in those modes. If you don't know what drains you, how do you manage your energy? So there's a lot to it. And you mentioned Noble, because, when it comes to emotional intelligence, the primary key component, foundational, is self-awareness. Because if you're not able to know, if you don't know who you are, how do you manage who you are? And if you can't manage who you are, how are you going to be able to understand how other people are, and their emotions affect everybody else? And how do you manage those relationships? So it's really important that we first take a deep look and look at ourselves. And I think often we don't. We don't take that time.
The past couple of times you've been on here, you badmouth my NFL team. You make fun of my perceived lack of cardio. But I'm going to compliment you here. You're pretty young. You're what, like 28, 30, somewhere around there?
Yeah, right about there.
That self-awareness. What would current Joe Bogdan say to 18-year-old Joe Bogdan?
So I think that something that I constantly, I get a question quite a bit, like, what would you change? You know what I mean? Like, what would you change in your life? And I'm like, oh, nothing big. I mean, there's probably moments where I can go back and say, hey, you probably should have said that a little bit better. They're very tactical little things like, oh, you probably didn't make someone feel good in that moment. You could have changed that. You know what I mean? Or how you approach that discussion. So they're more little things that if I could go back and change, I would probably change some of those. But it goes hand in hand with your question of what advice would I give. I think I would tell 18-year-old Joe that, hey, it's going to be fine, man. It's all going to work out. The trials and tribulations that you're going to go through, they're going to make you better. Just make sure you always look for the growth in that moment.
Yeah.
Because at times when you don't look for it, you don't see it. And then, I think I was just talking to somebody about mistakes and failures. Oh yeah. That was on AFN radio out here in Korea. Mistakes and failures, like mistakes and failures in themselves don't bring value. It's learning from them that does. So if you're not learning from them, you keep doing the same stuff, then they're not meaningful. Stop doing it. So I think that we do need to look for that growth in those moments. So that's probably the best piece of advice I would give. Like, don't worry about things are going to go bad. Things are not going to go well a lot. And you just got to figure out what the purpose of that pain is.
What's a quote in the past couple of weeks that really resonated with you?
A quote or a saying in the last couple of weeks. I just wrote something down while I was talking to somebody the other day. It was, man, you got me on this one. Yeah. How do I know who I am until I see what I do? Yeah.
It ties in good with what we've been talking about.
Right. How do I know who I am until I see what I do? And it was really talking about ethics and who you are. How do you identify your ethical framework when you're making decisions, and can you live with that? But you got to first know who you are. You know what I mean? And it's not who you are that you're telling yourself. It's how you're actually behaving. What you do is really who you are. Yeah. You could tell yourself you're a runner all day and you could say that you do cardio, Bodhi, but unless you're actually out there running, you're not really a runner,
That's just an example.
Yeah. Just an example. I didn't mean that was actually true.
Now I'm going to start posting shots of my Fitbit as I'm out there running. I'll be that person that says has a little trail if I ran 9.5 miles.
Yeah. I feel attacked right now.
This has been a very personal episode here. Next question for you. Book recommendation for our listeners.
Oh man. So the book recommendation, it does kind of fall into the whole character thing because we talk about it quite a bit in this book. Iron Sharpened Leadership, Transforming Hard-Fought Lessons into Action by a mentor and friend of mine that I discussed, that I brought up a little earlier, Major General, U.S. Army retired John Gronsky. Iron Sharpened Leadership he is an amazing person. His book is great. I think that leaders at any level should pick this up because there's a lot of books that give you some great perspectives, but they don't necessarily give you action items that you can take to go do. And his does that. Plus it gives you a spiritual component, not necessarily a religious component, but a spiritual component to each piece. And I think it's great. And the one thing that I love about it also is that each chapter can be read on its own. You don't necessarily have to read the book from beginning to end. You'll get a lesson from it. And each chapter is literally like 2 or 3 pages max.
Nice.
So, you know what I mean? So for people who are not huge readers, they can still pick this up and get some, knowledge out of it piece by piece, like a la carte from a buffet, or you can just read the whole thing and you get a lot of value out of that too. So love the book. I highly recommend people pick that up.
Yeah, he's awesome. He's been an awesome guest. He's actually helped us out of our schoolhouse a lot. Last piece of advice for our listeners. You have a take it home self-awareness question for our listeners to dwell on as they turn this episode off. What do you have for them?
Man, I'm going to ask this question. I wrote an article on this before too. What makes you so damn special? And, when you hear that, like some people use that as a pejorative, like what makes you so damn special? But no, I mean, like what makes you so damn special? Because each of us have something that's special about us, a talent. And a lot of us aren't even tapping into it because we're just going into the race. Every day we get up, whether that's the Hunger Games or whatever else that we're experiencing in life. We're constantly in that mode, and we don't really reflect on, like what we talked about, that self-awareness piece. Yeah. So I think that in order for all of us to embrace our amazing, which we all have, we need to know what it is. So what is it that makes you so damn special?
I like it. Simple. I like it though. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, if anybody wants to find out more about you or Llama Leadership, where can you point them to?
So you could definitely hit us up on our Facebook page, Llama Leadership. You could look us up on LinkedIn, Llama Leadership, as well as on Instagram, which I'll apologize ahead of time. I am not the best at Instagram, so we have a hard time keeping that up to date. But Facebook and LinkedIn, we do a better job, but we're working on the Instagram piece. You can also visit our website, llama-leadership.com, and listen to our podcast, the Llama Lounge, and you can find out on all of the podcast platforms out there, anything from Amazon Audible to Spotify, Anchor, and Apple Podcasts, etc. So take a listen. Or we're about to release, we're up into, I think, episode 125 or so right now. Yeah. A lot of great conversations about life, learning, and leadership.
Yeah, definitely check them out. If you've been listening to the Shadows podcast, we're huge advocates of everything over at Llama Leadership and the Llama Lounge podcast. So definitely check them out. Sir, thank you so much for joining us here on Rise from the Shadows.
Man, thank you for this opportunity, and thank you for what you're doing out there, not just in your profession, but your vocation, right? And I just had a great conversation with somebody that said there is a difference between a job, a career, and a vocation. And a vocation is doing what you're actually passionate about and what your life's, what you're called to do in life. And you're doing that with this podcast and everything else you're doing. So super grateful, and I'm just glad to be on here and love to come back again someday.
Well, I appreciate that. I've learned from my mentor on the opposite end of this conversation here. So definitely appreciate you. And folks, that is going to conclude this episode of Rise from the Shadows.